The laughter at the Langford estate stopped the instant the glass shattered. Red wine splashed across Elijah's white shirt, staining it like blood. The millionaire at the head of the table, Gerald Langford, father of the groom, didn't flinch. He merely lowered his hand from the slap that had sent the crystal flying and said coldly, "Next time, boy, you'll remember which glass is yours." The guests froze. Dozens of polished faces, draped in jewelry and privilege, stared at the young man who stood trembling beside the table. Elijah's dark skin gleamed beneath the chandeliers, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with a mix of humiliation and disbelief. For a long second, no one breathed. Gerald lifted a linen napkin, dabbed at his cuff, and smiled to his guests. "My wife insists on bringing the boy to family dinners," he said. "Calls it good for character. Mine, apparently." Laughter rose again, uneasy and brittle. Elijah stood rooted, the sting still fresh on his cheek. He was 26, tall, quiet, and painfully aware that he would never belong in this house of marble and mirrors. His mother, Clara, had married Gerald only 2 years ago, late in her life, after decades of working as a nurse. She sat now at the far end of the table, her knuckles white around her fork, shame written across her face. "Sit, Elijah," she whispered. "Please." He sat, not for his stepfather, but for her. The room smelled of roasted lamb, champagne, and money, heavy, intoxicating, suffocating. Every fork scrape echoed like an insult. Across the table, Gerald's biological son, Thomas, leaned toward a guest. "He's lucky Dad took him in at all," he murmured, not quietly enough. "If this were my place, I'd have sent him back to wherever she found him." Elijah heard it. He heard everything, but he said nothing. The dinner stretched on, a performance of civility over cruelty. The pianist in the corner resumed playing, notes tumbling through the silence like rain over broken glass. Servants poured wine. Clara tried to smile. Gerald toasted to family prosperity, his gold watch catching the light. When the plates cleared, Elijah excused himself. He walked down the long corridor lined with portraits, Langfords in oil and gilt, each staring as though guarding their legacy. His reflection in the glass of each frame felt like an accusation. "You don't belong here." He stopped at the end of the hallway, in front of the grand study. Through the half-open door, Gerald's voice carried, "I told you the will's mine. The boy gets nothing. I'll make sure Clara signs whatever papers are needed." A second voice, his lawyer, answered softly, "Sir, you might want to review the original deed again. There are clauses your late father left. Some you may have forgotten." Elijah froze. His late father? He turned away before they saw him. His pulse pounded with confusion and something darker, hope. He had grown up hearing nothing about his real father. His mother refused to speak of the past. But what if? Later that night, standing on the balcony beneath a sky choked with clouds, Elijah looked out over the sprawling estate. Every window glowed like a lie. He whispered to himself, "One day, this house will learn who I really am." Inside, Gerald laughed again, pouring another drink, unaware that his humiliation of the boy had just set in motion the undoing of everything he owned. Follow. For the next chapter, if you believe, dignity always finds its voice. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of the Langford mansion, striking gold off the marble floors as if mocking the silence that hung in the air. Elijah stood by the entryway, dressed in a plain gray shirt, the faint stain from last night's spilled wine still visible on his cuff. His reflection in the glass door looked older than 26, tired, restrained, but determined not to let humiliation own him twice. Down the hall, the house buzzed with soft movement. The staff, mostly older, loyal servants who had served Gerald Langford's father, moved quietly, eyes cast down. Some offered polite nods to Elijah as he passed. Others avoided his gaze, not out of malice, but fear of being seen showing kindness. "Good morning, Mr. Elijah," murmured Mrs. Howard, the cook, as she wiped her hands on her apron. Her voice carried a warmth that others dared not express. He smiled faintly. "Morning, Mrs. Howard." "You shouldn't let him see that bruise," she whispered, glancing around. "Mr. Langford doesn't like reminders of his temper." "I'm fine," Elijah said softly. But he wasn't. Every inch of the mansion seemed to whisper the same message. "You're an outsider." The family portraits stared down from the walls, each pale face framed in gold. The staff obeyed rules set long before his mother had married into this world, and none of them were written for people like him. When Elijah entered the breakfast room, Gerald was already there, reading the Wall Street Journal as though the world outside existed only for his profit. Thomas sat beside him, scrolling through his phone, while Clara poured coffee with trembling hands. "Ah," Gerald said, not looking up. "The guest of last night's little performance." Elijah froze halfway across the room. Thomas smirked. "Don't worry, Elijah. Father only ruins one dinner a week. You're safe until next Sunday." "Thomas," Clara said sharply. Gerald folded his paper slowly, his blue eyes cold. "Clara, you know my views. You can marry whomever you wish, but I won't have my name dragged into pity projects. The boy needs to find his place, and this house isn't it." Elijah clenched his jaw. "I didn't ask to be here, sir. I only stayed because because your mother wanted you to learn manners," Gerald interrupted. "But apparently that's too much to hope for." Clara set the pot down, her eyes glistening. "Gerald, please." For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Finally, Elijah turned to leave. "Don't worry, sir. I'll find my place soon enough." He walked out before his mother's tears could fall. The day stretched long and heavy. He spent the afternoon by the stables, away from the suffocating luxury. The old groundskeeper, Mr. Doyle, had worked for the Langfords for more than 40 years. His wrinkled face broke into a smile when he saw Elijah approach. "Didn't expect to see you down here, son," Doyle said. "Most of 'em won't step near the horses unless it's for a photograph." "I needed air," Elijah replied, running his hand along the stall door. "This place feels like a museum of ghosts," Doyle chuckled. Then his expression softened. "You remind me of someone, you know." "The old man, Gerald's father. Same quiet look in the eyes." Elijah turned. "You knew him well?" "Better than his own son did." "The old man was fair. Built this estate with his bare hands before the money rolled in. Didn't care about color or class. He had principles." Doyle leaned closer. "He had a friend once, a young black architect who helped design the West Wing. Good man. Left something behind here, I think." "What kind of something?" The old man hesitated. "Not my place to say. But if you want answers, look in the study, behind the portrait of the founder. There's a cabinet Gerald never touches. He doesn't like ghosts from his father's time." Elijah's pulse quickened. He thanked Doyle, hiding the flicker of hope that had just sparked inside him. That night, when the mansion had quieted, Elijah crept into the study. The heavy scent of leather and tobacco clung to the air. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, spilling across the desk where Gerald kept his papers. He found the portrait easily, an oil painting of the estate's founder, the late Henry Langford. The man's eyes seemed almost alive under the pale light. Elijah's fingers brushed the frame, and it shifted slightly, revealing a small brass latch. Behind it, a hidden cabinet. Inside were old documents, property deeds, letters, contracts. And one envelope yellowed with age bearing the name Clara Monroe. His mother's maiden name. Elijah opened it, hands trembling. Inside was a letter written in elegant cursive, "To Clara and our son, should fate ever separate us. My name is Henry Langford. Know that this estate, this land, was meant not for greed, but for legacy. Should my son Gerald prove unworthy, the estate shall return to the bloodline that carries honor, not arrogance." The words blurred as Elijah read them again. "Our son." He sank into the chair, the letter shaking in his hand. His father, his real father, was Henry Langford. The man Gerald had mocked him for not being worthy of was his grandfather. Suddenly, the humiliation, the mockery, the walls that shut him out, all of it shifted meaning. He was not an intruder in this house. He was its heir. He folded the letter carefully, heart pounding. There would be time for anger later. For now, he needed proof, clarity, and courage. Because when the truth came out, it would not just shake Gerald Langford's pride, it would destroy it. He looked once more at the portrait, the painted eyes glinting under the light. "You hid the truth well," Elijah whispered. "But I found it." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Inside, for the first time, Elijah smiled. The rain came down hard that night, battering against the windows as if the heavens themselves demanded truth. Elijah sat at the edge of his bed, the letter spread before him on the sheets, its ink faded, but its meaning sharp enough to cut through everything he'd been told. He traced the signature again. Henry Langford. It wasn't just a name. It was blood, legacy, justice long denied. Every insult Gerald had thrown at him now echoed differently in his mind. You don't belong here. You'll never be a Langford. The words twisted, then fell apart under the weight of the truth. The night stretched on without sleep. When dawn arrived, Elijah folded the letter carefully, slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket, and walked down the long marble corridor. His footsteps echoed in rhythm with the storm outside. Steady, deliberate, unafraid. In the kitchen, Mrs. Howard was kneading dough when he entered. She looked up, startled. "You're up early, Mr. Elijah." "Couldn't sleep," he replied softly. "Tell me something. You've worked here a long time. Did you know Henry Langford?" Her hands froze mid-motion. "I did, yes, kind man. Treated everyone with respect, no matter the color of their skin." "Why do you ask?" Elijah hesitated, then said, "He had a friend, an architect. Do you know what happened to him?" Mrs. Howard's eyes flickered with memory. "You mean Samuel Monroe?" The name hit Elijah like lightning. "Samuel Monroe?" "Yes," she whispered. "Your grandfather. He designed this house's west wing. Mr. Langford admired him. They were close, some say too close for the times. People talked, but Mr. Langford didn't care. When Samuel passed, he left behind a daughter, Clara. And then, well, history got rewritten by the ones who inherited the pen." Elijah stood frozen. Every piece of the puzzle now fit too perfectly to deny. He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Howard. You've helped more than you know," she smiled sadly. "Just be careful, son. Truth makes rich men nervous." By afternoon, Gerald had noticed Elijah's strange calm. The millionaire sat in his study, signing documents when Elijah entered quietly. Gerald didn't look up. "If you're here to apologize for last night's attitude, I'll consider accepting it." "I'm not here to apologize," Elijah said evenly. The pen paused mid-signature. "Then make it quick." Elijah stepped forward. "I found something that belongs to my mother." "To me?" Gerald's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "A letter. From Henry Langford." Gerald looked up sharply. "My father's personal correspondence is private property." Not when it mentions my mother by name. The silence that followed was thick, electric. Gerald's hand gripped the edge of his desk. "You're mistaken. Henry Langford never—" "He wrote about her. About their son." Elijah's voice stayed low, but steady. "He said the estate should go to the line that carries honor, not arrogance." "I think we both know which side that means." Gerald's chair creaked as he stood, fury flashing in his eyes. "You insolent little—" Elijah didn't flinch. "You've humiliated me since I set foot here. Called me Charity, mocked my mother's name. But it seems you've been living in a house that doesn't even belong to you." The older man's face turned pale. "You think a letter will change the law? This estate is mine, by title and by will." "Then maybe you should look at the right will," Elijah said, pulling the folded paper from his pocket. "Because your father signed too." Gerald snatched it from his hand, scanning it with trembling eyes. The handwriting was unmistakable, Henry Langford's. "Should my son Gerald fail in character and integrity, the estate shall revert to the true heir of Samuel Monroe's bloodline." The page shook in Gerald's grip. "Where did you get this?" "From the cabinet behind your father's portrait," Elijah replied. "He hid it, not to be forgotten, but to be found when the time was right." For the first time since Elijah had known him, Gerald Langford looked afraid. That evening the family gathered for dinner as usual. The chandelier sparkled above, but the air was tense, thick with unspoken knowledge. Thomas noticed first. "Father, you look like you've seen a ghost." Gerald's eyes flicked toward Elijah, then back to his plate. "Just tired," he muttered. Elijah sat quietly, letting the silence work for him. Clara glanced between them, sensing the storm beneath the surface. Finally, Gerald broke. "I want everyone to understand something," he said abruptly. "This estate, this family, stands on tradition. It will not be undermined by rumors or misplaced ambitions. Elijah spoke softly. Tradition built on lies never stands long. Gerald slammed his fork down. You think you've won something, boy? You think finding a dusty letter changes who you are? No, Elijah said. It just reminded me who you're not. Thomas pushed his chair back. What's going on? Clara's voice trembled. Gerald, please. But Gerald was already rising from his seat. You listen to me, he said, pointing a shaking finger at Elijah. Whatever nonsense you think you've discovered will die here. You'll say nothing to anyone. I won't have to, Elijah said, his calm almost frightening. Your lawyer will. What did you do? Gerald demanded. I sent him a copy of the letter this morning. The room fell dead silent. Gerald's face drained of color. You what? I asked him to verify the document's authenticity. I imagine he'll get back to you soon. Gerald's phone vibrated on the table at that exact moment. The timing was cruel, cinematic almost. Everyone stared as he picked it up with shaking hands. Langford, he said sharply. A pause. His face went ashen. That's impossible. Another pause. Then his voice cracked. Revert to whom? He ended the call slowly, eyes hollow. Clara whispered, Gerald. He looked at her, then at Elijah. The will was amended, he said weakly. 30 years ago. My father changed it after Samuel Monroe's death. The estate's trust is tied to his bloodline. The words hung like thunder over the table. Thomas stammered. You mean... Elijah finished for him. It means this house, this land, legally belongs to me. Gerald slumped into his chair, the weight of years of arrogance collapsing in seconds. The man who once ruled over everyone in this mansion now looked small, like a king whose crown had melted in his own fire. Elijah stood. Don't worry, he said quietly. I'm not here to take what's yours. I'm here to take back what was mine. He turned and walked out, leaving the family in stunned silence. Behind him, Gerald's voice trembled, almost broken. You have no idea what you've started. Elijah didn't look back. I think I just finished it. Outside, the rain had stopped. The moon broke through the clouds, silvering the wet gardens below. Elijah paused by the steps, breathing deeply. The night smelled like change, clean, electric, irreversible. In the distance, a single light flickered in the study window. Gerald was still awake, still staring into the ghosts of his father's words. Inside the house, the portrait of Henry Langford hung silently, its painted eyes glimmering in the moonlight, as though the man himself approved of the justice finally stirring beneath his roof. The storm had passed, leaving the Langford estate washed in fragile sunlight. The grass still shimmered with dew, and for the first time in years, the house felt alive, breathing, not brooding. Elijah stood at the edge of the long stone balcony, the folded letter in his hand once more. The ink had begun to fade, but the power it held was eternal. Behind him, the echoes of last night's confrontation lingered like ghosts now set free. He looked out over the gardens Henry Langford once walked, imagining the man's steady stride beside his grandfather, Samuel Monroe. Two men, one white, one black, united by creation, not color. That was the legacy worth inheriting. A quiet knock at the door broke his reflection. Elijah? The voice was hesitant, stripped of its usual command. Gerald stood in the doorway, his tailored suit replaced by something simple, a sweater, loose trousers. For the first time, he didn't look like a millionaire. He looked like a man who'd seen himself clearly at last. Elijah turned slightly. You didn't have to come. I did, Gerald said softly. He walked in, hands clasped behind his back. I've spoken with the lawyers. It's true. Every word of that document, Elijah nodded. I'm not surprised. Gerald took a slow breath. I won't fight it. The estate, the trust, they're yours now. But I wanted to tell you something before the papers make it official. He paused, searching for words that had never come easy. I was raised to believe power meant control. That wealth made men superior. I suppose I thought treating you like less kept me on top. It just made you smaller, Elijah replied quietly. Gerald looked down, shame softening his posture. You're right. And for that, I am sorry. The words hung in the air, not rehearsed, not forced, genuine. Elijah didn't answer right away. He studied the man who had once called him a burden, who had made his mother cry, who had laughed when he failed. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was necessary. "You hurt a lot of people," Elijah said finally. "But maybe this is your chance to start over. Away from this house. Away from what it made you," Gerald nodded slowly. "Maybe so. I'll leave by week's end." He turned to go, but stopped at the door. "Your mother. She deserved better than me." "She did," Elijah said. "But at least now her name will live where it belongs, in this family." Gerald looked back one last time, eyes glistening. "Take care of it, Elijah. The house, the name, the legacy." "I will," Elijah said simply. Later that day, the townspeople gathered near the iron gates of the Langford estate. Word had spread quickly about the hidden will, about the young man once humiliated in plain sight now standing as rightful heir. Humiliated in plain sight now standing as rightful heir. Some came out of curiosity, others came out of quiet admiration. Elijah stood before them, not dressed in a suit or gold cufflinks like Gerald used to wear, but in a simple shirt and vest, the kind his grandfather might have worn. When the reporters asked if he planned to sell the mansion, he shook his head. "No, I'm not selling it. I'm rebuilding it. Into a community arts center. My grandfather designed this place to inspire. That's what it'll do again." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. "And what about the Langford name?" a journalist called out. Elijah smiled faintly. "Names fade. Deeds don't. I'll keep the name, but I'll fill it with new meaning." Applause rose softly, spreading like morning light. Among the crowd, Mrs. Howard wiped tears from her eyes. "Your mother would be proud, child," she whispered. Elijah looked up at the sky, a deep, forgiving blue. "I think she already is." That night, the estate was quiet again. Elijah walked through the west wing, his footsteps echoing where his grandfather's tools once clattered decades ago. He paused before the old architectural drawings now framed on the wall. Each line carried legacy. Each curve whispered memory. He laid his hand gently against the blueprint of the grand staircase. "You built this," he murmured to his grandfather's ghost. "Now I'll build what you dreamed." As he turned to leave, the faint reflection of Henry Langford's portrait caught his eye. The man's painted expression seemed softer now, as if time itself had forgiven him too. Elijah took one last look around the mansion, once a symbol of arrogance, now reclaimed by justice, and smiled. Then, softly to himself, he said, "Dignity never needed wealth, it just needed truth." He stepped out into the open night. The moonlight bathed the house in silver calm. For the first time, it didn't feel like someone else's home. It felt like history finally restored. 3 months had passed since the night truth cracked open the walls of the Langford estate. Where arrogance once echoed, hammers now struck in rhythm. Dust hung in the air, sunbeams slicing through it like golden threads. Elijah walked the marble corridor barefoot, hearing the faint chatter of workers painting the grand foyer. The sound was different now, not servants obeying orders, but craftsmen shaping renewal. He paused beside the great staircase. Once, Gerald had stood there declaring who belonged and who didn't. Now, a banner hung above the railing, draped in soft cream fabric. The Monroe Langford Cultural Foundation, building bridges. Not walls, Elijah smiled faintly. His mother's maiden name came first. The decision had stirred talk across town. Some praised it, others scoffed. That boy's changing too much. But Elijah knew it wasn't about erasing history. It was about writing the truth beside it. He turned as Mrs. Howard approached, clipboard in hand, her hair tied back under a wide straw hat. "You know," she said, smiling, "your mama used to dream about this. Said one day this house would open its doors to everyone." Elijah's gaze softened. "Then let's make sure it never closes again." Mrs. Howard nodded. "We're almost ready for the dedication ceremony. Reporters, students, half the town's coming." He exhaled slowly, nerves rippling beneath calm. She deserved to see this. "She's seeing it, baby," the old woman said. "She's right here." Elijah looked toward the old family portrait still hanging in the hall. Gerald, young and confident beside Henry Langford. For a moment, he thought about removing it, but he didn't. Forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was reclaiming power. Outside, on the front lawn, scaffolding surrounded the once crumbling fountain. A new bronze plaque gleamed under the sun, in memory of Samuel Monroe, the architect who built dreams into stone. Elijah knelt, brushing a fingertip along the inscription. His reflection shimmered on the metal. "Grandpa," he whispered, "we did it." A soft breeze swept across the lawn, stirring fallen petals. Somewhere, it felt like approval. That afternoon, Gerald returned for the last time. He arrived quietly. No chauffeur, no polished car, just him and a single suitcase. Elijah met him near the fountain, unsure what words could bridge their world. "I wanted to see it before I go," Gerald said, looking up at the restored facade. "It's different now. Feels alive again." Elijah folded his arms. "It should have always felt that way." Gerald nodded slowly. "I agree. You've done what I never could." The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. "You leaving the country?" Elijah asked, "Going north for a while. Might teach architecture again. It's strange. After losing everything, I feel lighter." "Maybe that's because you finally stopped holding on to what wasn't yours," Elijah replied. A faint smile tugged at Gerald's mouth. "Maybe. I hope you don't carry what I gave you, the anger, the bitterness." "You're better than that." Elijah studied him for a long moment, then offered his hand. "Goodbye, Gerald." The older man hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, almost grateful. "Goodbye, Elijah." When Gerald turned and walked away, his shadow stretched long against the driveway. Elijah watched until the gates closed behind him. The past was finally leaving the property. By evening, lanterns glowed across the courtyard. Guests filled the lawn, laughter mingling with the sweet sound of violins. The same house that once whispered prejudice now hummed with unity. At the podium, Elijah adjusted the microphone. His voice, steady yet thick with emotion, carried across the crowd. "This house was built by hands the world didn't see," he began. "Hands that designed, carved, painted, and planted, but were never invited inside. Today those doors are open. For good." Applause rolled like a wave. He looked up briefly, eyes shining in the lamplight. "My mother believed that dignity isn't given. It's lived. She taught me that forgiveness doesn't mean surrender. It means we choose to be better than those who tried to break us. So, this place will be more than an estate. It'll be a space for art, for children, for community, for hope." As he spoke, a projector flickered to life behind him, displaying old photos. Samuel Monroe drafting the staircase design, his mother planting flowers by the gate. Elijah as a boy sketching buildings in the corner of a dusty workshop. People in the crowd wiped tears, caught between history and healing. "And to the man who once owned this house," Elijah added gently, "I hope he finds peace too. Because hatred only wins if it stays here." The applause swelled louder, standing and unending. Mrs. Howard stepped forward, clutching her heart. "That's your mama in your voice," she said softly. Elijah smiled, blinking away tears. "She gave me everything I needed." Later that night, after the last guests left, Elijah wandered into the ballroom. The moonlight fell through the tall glass, silvering the restored marble floor. He stopped at the piano his mother used to play, untouched for years. Sitting down, he pressed a key. The note lingered, trembling, beautiful, one by one. He played a quiet tune, her song, the one she used to hum while cooking dinner in the small apartment they once called home. The melody filled the hall, blending with the chirp of crickets outside. And when the final note faded, Elijah whispered, "It's done, Mama. We're home." As he walked toward the open doors, the wind carried the faint scent of magnolia, his mother's favorite. He looked up at the stars scattered over the estate's roofline, feeling her presence in every glimmer. Tomorrow, new children would run these halls, laughing where once he'd been silenced. Tomorrow, the world would know the Monroe name not through pain, but purpose. He turned off the last light, leaving the house bathed in soft moonlight. It no longer belonged to a man. It belonged to a movement. The doors closed gently behind him, not in finality, but peace.